The Housing Assistance Council is a national nonprofit that supports affordable housing efforts throughout rural America. Since 1971, HAC has provided below-market financing for affordable housing and community development, technical assistance and training, research and information, and policy formulation to enable solutions for rural communities. Welcome to today's webinar, Rural Housing in the Fiscal Year 2024 White House Budget. Today we will be discussing rural housing and community facilities highlighted from both USDA and HUD sections of the budget. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Leslie Strauss has been at HAC since 1991, and she's currently a senior policy analyst. Leslie is responsible for a variety of policy and information activities, including editing the HAC News. Leslie has a law degree and practiced real estate law for several years before joining HAC. Leslie also serves on the board of the National Rural Housing Coalition. Now I'd like to introduce Joe Belden, our second speaker. Joe is a writer and consultant on rural issues, poverty, and affordable housing. In recent years, he taught courses at American University's OLLI program and Allende Institute in Mexico and other venues. He writes regularly for the Daily Yonder and other publications, and from 1989 to 2015, he was Deputy Executive Director of the Housing Assistance Council. He's also worked at USDA, on Capitol Hill, and for several DC-based think tanks. The principal author, editor of Housing in Rural America, Building Affordable Inclusive Communities, and Dirt Rich, Dirt Poor, America's Food and Farm Crisis. Joe is a graduate of the University of Texas, Austin, and the Baylor University Law School. Now I'd like to turn the floor over to today's speakers.
Hi, everybody. This is Joe. I think I'm starting first here on the budget and appropriations process in the Congress. Many of you are probably very familiar with this. In the old days, the bad old days, the president's annual budget would come out actually in early February. That's usually certainly after the State of the Union address. Now it's gotten delayed, so it's around this time, March. But what happens now is that proposal moves to both the House and Senate appropriations committees and to the Budget Committee. The Congressional Budget Act of 1974 was supposed to bring order to the appropriations process, and in theory, the Budget Committee and budget committees of Congress, House and Senate, and the Congress is supposed to produce a budget overall framework by April 25th every year, and then that leads to what are called the Section 302B allocations, referring to a portion of the Budget Act. Those allocations tell the appropriations committees and their subcommittees what money they have to spend, on this fiscal year budget that's supposed to start October 1st. In practice, that budget process is most of the time never been completed on time, and things just kind of proceed ahead. The appropriating committees don't really wait on it. But in the appropriations committees, there are 12 subcommittees, and for our purposes, the important ones are the USDA appropriations subcommittees in both House and Senate, and the HUD, Transportation HUD subcommittees, as you may know. The Department of Agriculture programs or housing programs, the rural housing programs, are not part of the HUD appropriations subcommittee. They're part of the agriculture appropriations in the overall USDA budget. So those subcommittees now have already started the process of having hearings on the proposals.
On this webinar.
Hello. Yeah. I was checking this morning. The House Appropriations Subcommittees actually next Thursday have 10 separate hearings scheduled, including one for the Forest Service, part of USDA, and actually what they call a member and public statements day, where members of Congress And I think the public also can come make 5-minute statements before the Ag Appropriations Subcommittee. So that process is all kind of underway. Then in theory, they finish all that in the spring. And then in May, June, they start doing what are called markups. And that's where they draft appropriations bills, to fund their particular programs under the jurisdiction of their subcommittees for the new fiscal year. In this case, it'll be fiscal year 24, of course, starting October 1st. And then in the summer, those bills go through the full appropriations committees and they go to the floor of the House and Senate, get debated, passed in the Congress in the summer, then go to what's called a conference committee, and that's where the differences between the House and Senate versions get resolved and then passed and sent to the president for a signature or veto or reworking. And in theory, everything is done by October 1st for the start of the fiscal year. As you may know, that has seldom happened in recent decades to actually start by October 1st. They're usually continuing resolutions, which sort of continue things for a set period based on last year's levels, the previous year's levels. Sometimes it's even more complicated than that. They go to something called the reconciliation process, which is a kind of budget trickster to get things finally finished without a Senate filibuster. And the, excuse me, as you may know from reading the Hack News, the fiscal 23 budget that we're now into, that we're almost 6 months into, 6 months, April 1st, was not completed in final form until the end of December of last year, just a few months ago. So it's a complicated process that kind of goes on for a while and is usually much delayed. The other kind of, I don't know, dirty little secret, I hope everyone doesn't abandon the call here, but the president's budget in any administration is in some ways kind of irrelevant, because what the Congress starts with, Willie, is last year's final numbers. And particularly this year with a new, conservative House, a conservative Republican House, and a relatively liberal Democratic Senate, there are likely to be conflicts between the two final versions. And the folks in the House have already said, President Biden's budget is not going to be considered. It's dead on arrival, and that's usually the kind of thing that happens. And it may be further complicated this year, as you may know, by fights over the debt ceiling limitation. So that's kind of a quick overview of that budget process. But keep up with the Hack News with Leslie and the rest of the Hack staff, who will keep you updated on all of that. So.
Thank you, Joe. I watched the this is Leslie Strauss. I watched the number of participants logged in, and I was happy to see that nobody logged out when you said that the budget was dead on arrival. So hopefully this information will be useful somehow.
Yeah.
To people. All right. I'm going to talk first about the USDA programs, and then Joe will take over and talk about the HUD programs. Starting with USDA multifamily, a big concern for all the multifamily programs that kind of looms over everything is rental housing preservation. The Section 515 program, as most of you probably know, financed hundreds of thousands of rental units 20, 30 or more years ago. And so now the mortgages are ending, the buildings need renovations. Sometimes owners are prepaying their mortgages. So funding to preserve those units is being pulled from a lot of the multifamily programs. And the next slide, which I'm not quite getting to yet, is specifically about preservation programs, but the programs on this slide are relevant for preservation as well. The 515 direct loan program, which, as I said, was used to finance many, many units that still currently exist, has not had enough money since fiscal 2012 for new construction. So all the 515 money has been used for preservation and subsequent loans, things like that. The administration last year proposed, I think it was 200 or 250 million, which would have been enough to do some new construction. Congress didn't go along with that. And so the administration is proposing that again this year. The 514 and 516 farm labor programs, which go together, one provides loans and one provides grants. Not all people entities constructing farm labor housing are eligible for the grants, but many of the projects do get grants. Those are also proposed for increases. I'm going to skip the rental assistance line for a second. The rental housing guaranteed loan program, section 538, is proposed to stay at the same amount as last year, but that was a big increase over the previous year because that program, which is used for a lot of new construction as well as some preservation, was way oversubscribed. There was far more demand than the program could meet. Rental assistance, section 521, is proposed for an increase that would cover several different things. One is inflation. They're assuming that the costs of each rental assistance contract will go up because rents are going up because of inflation. It would renew all existing rental assistance contracts, including a batch of them that's been somewhat uncertain over the last year or so. 50,000 rental assistance contracts that were added with funding from the American Rescue Plan Act a couple of years ago. Those are all going to need to be renewed. And there's some differences of approach, let's say, in how people on the Hill feel about continuing those contracts. HAC feels that the tenants who were cost burdened before they got that rental assistance really need them. The other component of this rental assistance amount is $6 million, which is not a very big component, but it's still in there for newly constructed units with the 515 and 514, 516 funding. So this is the list of preservation programs I mentioned. The Rental Preservation Demonstration or Multifamily Preservation and Revitalization Program, or MPR, because the rest of that is a mouthful, is proposed for an increase. It has also been way oversubscribed, far more demand than money, and could use the entire 75 million in budget authority that's provided there. The Rural Housing Voucher Program is proposed to go down because that would not cover new vouchers. It would only renew existing ones. I need to back up a second and explain where vouchers fit into this in USDA. USDA vouchers are a whole separate program, not connected to HUD's vouchers. Although USDA's or the budget's proposal is to put tenants getting vouchers for the first time this year and in the future would get HUD vouchers rather than USDA. There's an legislative proposal that would have to be passed in legislation by Congress separate from this appropriations process that Joe talked about earlier, that would do several things for preservation purposes. And one of them is to provide new vouchers from HUD instead of USDA so that eventually the departments wouldn't be running sort of overlapping programs. The other is to decouple rental assistance from USDA mortgages. As most of you probably know, you can't get, the owner of a property can't get rental assistance for their tenants unless they have an currently active 515 or 514 mortgage. And decoupling those programs would mean that you could continue providing USDA rental assistance in the same property, even when it didn't have a USDA mortgage. That would benefit the tenants, obviously, because they could stay in their same homes. They wouldn't get displaced, and would benefit the owners because they would still have tenants. That was proposed last year in the budget and didn't pass. It's not clear what its chances are this year. I think it has a slightly greater chance than, trying to advance the slide, there we go, the legislative proposal that goes along with the 502 single family direct program, which is mortgages for low and very low income home buyers, proposing to end what's called subsidy recapture, which requires Section 502 borrowers, when they no longer own the property, which means when they die or when they want to sell their home, they're required to repay a chunk of the subsidy that they got that enabled them to become homeowners in the first place. Kind of a strange arrangement, and the administration proposes to end that. Unfortunately, they have to attach a cost to eliminating that for all the people that already have 502 mortgages, and that would be almost $1 billion. It's estimated to end up $996 million. Not money actually taken away from the budget, but calculated as a cost, so that it makes it highly unlikely that that particular legislative proposal is actually going to happen. The other things you see on this slide are like the multifamily programs. The single family programs have a direct component and a guarantee component. Unfortunately, in the single family, they both have the same number, Section 502. There's been a pilot program for 502 direct loans, giving the money to Native American CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions, who actually do the lending process. And that's been very popular, and so the budget proposes to increase that for next year as well. Moving on to repairs, the 504 programs are for very low income people who already own their own homes and need to do repairs. There's both loans and grants. The self-help grant program, Section 523, is, you saw, if you logged in early enough, you saw a really nice video while we were waiting for this to start, with a self-help participant giving a tour of his house and talking about how much it meant to be able to own a house and to have helped construct it. The 523 program is for the organizations that sponsor the people, the families that are doing self-help building. And finally, the last bit of USDA funding I'll mention here is community facilities, which is also administered by the Rural Housing Service. It consists of loans, grants, and guarantees. All of them are proposed to stay at essentially the same amounts as last year. The Community Facilities Grant Program looks like it got a huge bump in fiscal 23, but that was almost all earmarks. The earmarks for USDA rural development programs that members of Congress and the senators are now allowed to include or request are almost all in the community facilities grants account. So that bumps that number way up. And there was, initially, we thought there was no money for regular grants. It turns out there was some. I see people are putting questions in the chat. We're going to hold them until the end. And I'm going to let Joe talk about the HUD programs first, and then we will address the questions. I think we should have plenty of time to do that. So Joe, here's HUD, and over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Leslie. HUD, of course, is a much larger total account, despite its name, Housing and Urban Development. The HUD programs, as most of you know, I'm sure, are used substantially in rural areas. In the main HUD programs, many of them have some small increases. The biggest programs have some pretty substantial increases proposed for 24. You'll see some of that here, for example, in the largest HUD programs, the rental assistance programs, pretty substantial increases there. In public housing, at the bottom of that table, both the capital fund, the operating fund have fairly small kind of increases, but increases nonetheless. Then the next table, Leslie, about CDBG and home. You're going to go to that one. Yeah, the Community Development Block Grant Program is at level funding, but actually the final version of CDBG last year was much larger than that, I think over 6 billion, because it included a large number of earmarks. Earmarks went away for about 10 years, but now they're back as of the last couple of years. All in CDBG. Those are membered, congressionally directed spending accounts for things in members' districts. And if you go to for example, to the House Appropriations website today, you can see there are processes for members to submit applications for proposals for this congressionally directed spending. So that is definitely back. The home program is getting a fairly good increase there of $300 million. And going on to the next slide, Leslie, the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative is mostly an urban program for revitalization of distressed neighborhoods. That's getting a cut. Native American housing and the homeless grants and the PAPWA program are getting small proposed increases there. And again, most of these increases, they may or may not get adopted by the Congress. They're more likely to get accepted in the Senate, less so in the House. And then on the next slide, Leslie, the 202 Housing for the Elderly program and the 811 program for the disabled actually has small cuts proposed, and that often happens every year, whether it's a Democratic or a Republican administration. Fair housing has a very small increase. The Healthy Homes Lead Hazard program is kept level. Housing counseling has a small increase, and that's kind of it for the overall look at housing programs. Something that's quite interesting. I'm not sure if Leslie is going to talk more about this, but the budget includes something that I think has not been around before, and that is to turn some housing accounts into mandatory spending programs. There they are, yeah. This is almost all housing programs have never been mandatory spending. So this is a very interesting proposal that would require authorizing legislation. You may know the difference between appropriations bills and authorizing bills. The Department of Defense, I looked this up recently, for the last 62 years, every year has had a bill to authorize, to change, create new and amend defense spending programs. Housing programs almost never have had those bills. The last major housing authorization bill was in 1990, the bill that created the home program. So these are very interesting ideas here. probably not going to go anywhere, particularly in the House, but interesting to see these proposals out there. So.
Thanks, Joe. I'm actually going to go back a step. Joe mentioned that the 202 and 811 programs are often proposed for cuts. Something that Joe taught me years ago is because that happens because Congress isn't going to cut those programs. So it's safe to suggest that they be cut in order to save money for something, but we wouldn't expect that to actually occur. So I'm going to just mention a couple of small but important programs for HAC and the partners we work with, because these are things that we can make good use of to improve rural housing. One is the SHOP program at HUD, Self-Help Homeownership Opportunity Program. It got its first increase in a long time last year, moving up to 13.5 million, and the budget proposes to cut that back to 10 million, which was the amount it was at for a number of years earlier. HAC is one of several organizations, and many of you may have seen we've been circulating a sign-on letter asking for 20 million for SHOP for fiscal 24. The other two programs on here are both capacity building. One is at HUD and one is at USDA. The administration proposes to drop HUD's rural capacity building program back from, it got a slight bump up to 6 million last year, and the administration proposes to drop that back down to 5. Unrelatedly, it seems, at least there's no relationship expressed in the budget documents, they proposed a really gigantic in proportionate terms increase in the Rural Community Development Initiative at USDA. And the explanation for that in the text says capacity building is good and we like it and we need more of it, but it doesn't say what specifically they have in mind with asking for that much or why that particular 22.8 number. So again, we'd love to see that happen, but it's not clear what the administration has in mind for it. Our other or our more general funding priorities for fiscal 24 remain much the same as they have been for a while, to support multifamily preservation for USDA through programs like MPR, to support rural capacity building, the programs that I was just talking about, and self-help ownership through programs like SHOP and USDA's Self-Help 523 program. We have even more policy priorities for, this says 2023 because it's not specifically for fiscal 23, but more for the legislative, what we hope will get adopted this year. And you can check those out on our website. I think in the version of the slides that gets posted on the website after this, oh, Dan's putting it in the chat. Thank you, Dan. I was going to say, I think this will be a live link in the PDF version of this. And last, but most certainly not least, if you scan this thing, you get, or you can just go to ruralhome.org and click on subscribe to HAC's emails. Sign up for HAC's emails, I think is what it says. You can get the HAC News newsletter, which comes out every 2 weeks, and other useful information from HAC. And we are able to take questions. Dan, do you want to read questions for us?
Sure thing, yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you for the presentation, Joe and Leslie. The first question is from, that looks like Larry Anderson. He thanks you for the great presentation and says, is there an active legislative proposal now to track what will decouple RA and move it RD vouchers to HUD vouchers?
One is going to be introduced. I don't think it's been introduced yet. It will be sponsored by Senator Shaheen, and her name sticks in my head because she's done this before. I don't remember who the other expected co-sponsors are, but it's a bill that's been proposed the last couple of Congresses that would make the NPR program permanent, decouple rental assistance, and I think do a couple of other preservation-related things. I don't know whether it has any better chance of getting adopted this year than it has in the past, but it will be out there.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm going to guess that might be Tina Smith from Minnesota.
It might be, yes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I'll keep watching the Hack newsletter.
That's where we will keep reporting on it. Yes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Could I just, Leslie, could I just add on that? And
yes.
Larry, you and Leslie probably have more information than I do on this, but I understood that Senator Brown, the chair of the Senate Banking Committee, was interested in possibly adding that bill into the Farm Bill. I don't know what the status is of that now, but sort of heard some things about that.
I didn't mention that because I'm not sure how likely that is to happen, but it's a possibility, yes.
Yeah.
The Farm Bill, just for folks who may not know, the Farm Bill does not usually include housing programs, but there is a Farm Bill every 4 years or so, and this 2023 is a Farm Bill year, so there is a chance that some housing stuff could be included in there.
And Senator Brown is on the Agriculture Committee also, which does the Farm Bill. So anyway.
Right. Thanks.
All right. Is it Nichelle or Nichelle? You had a question earlier. I don't know if you still wanted to ask that, or you're okay.
Well, my question was, she had mentioned that USDA vouchers, was that for the preservation properties that couldn't find a preservation buyer? So USDA issues a voucher so that they can keep affordability with the housing. It's not necessarily a Section 8 voucher. Is that what you were referring to?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay, that was my point of clarity. That's all. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I saw someone asked in the chat whether 502 subsidy recapture is actually going away. And Jill Lorden, thank you, Jill, provided the answer that I would have said, which is that the president's budget provides that, but it's very unlikely to pass. So it would be nice if that would happen, but we don't expect it to.
And we have a previously submitted question. What impact might the debt ceiling negotiations have on all of this?
Joe mentioned that before,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm going to let him say more about that if there's more to say.
Well, yeah, I don't think anybody knows. It would be surprising if it doesn't have some impact, because it's probably going to be a lot of, storminess of back and forth about what happens there with the House Republicans demanding cuts, and they look at programs like housing for those cuts. So I think it, unfortunately, stay tuned. Yeah.
I saw something yesterday or the day before that the Congressional Budget Office, which is known for its good nonpartisan analyses of things, had come out with a report saying that you can't eliminate the budget deficit while still preserving all the tax cuts and not touching what's the word I'm looking for? Social Security and those programs, the entitlement programs, sorry. So that the proposals to do that by cutting only domestic spending just won't work. There's not enough money there. Anything
Okay.
else?
I don't see any other questions coming in. Anybody have any questions for these folks?
We can explain more about the programs too, or other things that aren't necessarily strictly about the budget if we confused anybody about the other things.
Will you guys be sending out the slides for us to review that attended today?
Yes, we will be sending them out. They're also available if you scroll up in the chat. The slides will be posted on the site where you registered for this training as well, along with the recording. So if you want to come back and get clarity from any bits, that'll all be available on our website, but we will also follow up with the slides.
Thank you.
I see a question in the chat. I'm trying to become a homeowner. What's available to help? The best way to find out about USDA homeownership programs is to contact a local USDA rural development office. Without
The package for USDA Direct here at Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership. We are a certified HUD agency and I'm on the call, so you're more than welcome to reach out to us. We package in-house right here for that program. I'll put my number in the chat.
Thank you very much.
And it looks like we have a few other questions. We would like to know about the upcoming release of the Inspire HUD inspection protocols.
I do not know about that.
I don't either. I'm sorry. Wow.
Anyone else? Stephanie,
I know.
maybe?
I know a teeny bit. I think as far as I know, Larry might have his hand up to respond. That there is, I think it's still in beta testing, and I don't believe I've seen a release date of when they're going live. But if somebody has more up-to-date information, please.
Hey, well, I'll jump in real quick since I did have my hand up for something else, but
Okay.
I just sat through 2 presentations of Inspire, and yeah, they are getting close to releasing this thing full up. They've got a real, apparently informative website that'll update everybody on it. But as far as the USDA RD world, I don't think we're affected by Inspire at this point. You know, unless you have a Section 8 project or a Section 8 subsidy in one of the 515 projects. So the guy kept on going back and saying, you got to see the website. So apparently their Inspire website is pretty informative, tells everybody where they're at. They feel it's very successful. They've been getting real good feedback. They've been making changes, but they're still, they still have to release the final package. And if I remember right, it's sometime in the summer. So that's all I know.
And Larry, you said you had a question of your own.
Yes, I did.
That wasn't
Yes.
just Inspire.
Yes, yeah, because I'm not an expert on Inspire. I'm sorry, but the TA number, I noticed that goes to 0 in 2024. Do you have any insight about why 2 million 22, 2 million 23, and then 0 in 24?
It's possible that that's because the money, not all the money that's been appropriated in the past has been used yet. USDA has put some of it out, but not all of it. I would also note that last year the administration proposed 0 for preservation TA, and Congress included 2 million anyway. So I I'm hoping that's not terribly meaningful. I know that that's been very helpful for preservation efforts.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's what I was wondering because I know HAC is a TA provider as well as other organizations like Enterprise Community Partners across the country. And as far as I can see, I've been involved with a number of those transactions. It's really needed, and it's unlocking a lot of potential for nonprofits. And if any nonprofit that's online now that wants to get a hold of us, please start with HAC and make a contact with us and find out if we can help you, because it's free TA. And I think it's what I've seen has really made a difference in the nonprofits we've been working with. Okay, thanks.
And speaking of getting hold of HAC, we didn't put our emails on the slides, but I should give my email address. Joe's probably not reachable at HAC anymore, unfortunately, but I am Leslie, Leslie, at ruralhome.org. And I can put that in the chat too.
I'm adding it to the chat.
Thank
and
if you want mine, not that I know anything anymore, but mine is Belden, BELDEN 1419 at gmail.com. So.
I'm gonna have to pull that from something. We do have one other question from Joanna. Have there been any discussions about once again funding the old Section 525 technical and supervisory assistance grant program?
Joanna, all I can tell you is that it's not in the budget, and I don't know what USDA may be discussing internally. But it's not there. We call it the Susan Peck program. For those who don't know, Susan Peck used to be the Western Office Director at HAC. And all of us Hacksters are giving that a little heart.
For sure. And it actually had a great impact in Indian country as well, because of the work that she did with building capacity around 502 under that TSA program. So I know it's still on the books, just is not funded.
Right.
And Jennifer Birch has a question about the VASH. They've reduced the amount of VASH housing vouchers, which seems a little bizarre considering how many homeless veterans there are nationwide. Do you have any insight into that?
I don't particularly. As some of you may not know, that's the Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing set of vouchers, a kind of a combination program between HUD and VA. And several years ago, I haven't kept up with this, but several years ago, there was sort of a declaration that veterans homelessness was mostly solved. I think that's probably not true, but somehow they've stopped proposing to fund it. I don't remember what it was in the last couple of years, but yeah, it used to be getting a fairly healthy chunk of funds every year, but then they've kind of just gotten away from it. And I'm not sure what the rationale is. Some of it may be, as Leslie was referring to, like the HUD 202 program, where they propose cuts knowing that the Congress is likely to put it back. Nobody wants to cut programs for veterans. So
that's exactly what I was going to suggest, because it's been funded at what's on the slides that we just went through are fiscal 22 and 23, and it was funded at 50 million in both those years. I know last year's budget proposed to cut it. I don't remember if it was a proposal to go to zero or if it was a proposal just to reduce the total amount. But yeah, it might be something that's expected to be supported by Congress.
Senator Murray from Washington is now the chair of the Appropriations Committee. And several years ago, she was chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee. So I think she's pretty tuned into this. So yeah, we very likely it'll get put back.
All right. I do not see any more questions coming in. So
If folks
Before-
aren't
go
reading the
ahead.
chat, I do encourage you to do that because there's a
Mhm.
couple of explanations that people have
Mhm.
posted about things. Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
Oh, no, absolutely. I just want to say before we let you go, I wanted to make sure everyone was aware that our National Rural Housing Conference is coming up this year in October, October 24th to 27th. Those of you who are longtime friends of HEC and that attend the conference, that's a little bit different than normal, but we have a conference coming up this year and we'd love to see you all there. So more information will be coming. Stay with, as we said before, with Hack News. Stay with Hack News. You'll get our updates on the conference and everything else. So go ahead.
Before we go, I'm on the site. Where do I find the slides from today's webinar?
They may not have been posted quite yet.
They're there.
Oh, they are
It's
there.
all
Okay.
the way at the very bottom. Scroll all the way down, and there'll be a header called Resources. You'll see the PowerPoint at the bottom, and then we'll post the YouTube video there probably later today or tomorrow.
Wait, Nichelle,
Okay,
are you on the home page?
I'm sorry.
You're
Are
on
you
the home
our
page, not the event page.
I think Stephanie's
so.
talking about the event page.
And how do I get to the event page?
Let me drop it back in the chat. Give me just a second.
Because nothing's under there but the conference under events.
Yeah, I think that's a glitch in the drop-down menu because if you click on events, you should get other things besides the conference.
The website is very aggressive about moving events into the past once they've started happening. So
you'll see in the chat the event.
Okay. Resources in the PowerPoint. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
And that's where the recording will be. All right, if there are no other questions, Joe or Leslie, if you have anything else, otherwise we can wrap up. All right, thank you all so much for attending.
Everyone.